Hello and welcome to the Decking Awesome podcast. My name is Ciara and I'm joined by the awesome Owen and Brian.
Hello.
Hey.
Today we are talking about dice versus deck randomness. There are plenty of awesome games out there that either use dice or decks of cards for their randomness. Sometimes they use both. We're going to pit these two board game concepts at each other for the banter and to see what happens. First up, what is randomness in games and why do we have dice and decks? Games without dice and decks like chess are about a strategic fight against each other, and they pit people's strategies without having any sort of variation in the game. You can play a game of chess 1,000 times and the concepts always stay the same, and you don't have to adapt any of your skills or strategy for what's happening on the board. Whereas games with randomness, which are quite a lot of board games, from things like King of Tokyo or anything else, involve adapting to whatever happens with the dice and the deck. So they add more variety, they add different things to happen each game, they make games less repetitive. And now we're going to discuss which we prefer, which we think are going to work better in board games. So debating that dice are king, we have Owen up, and debating that decks of cards are best is Brian. So Owen, let's kick off with your opening statement.
Hey, so I totally agree that games with randomness are really, really fun. I still love chess, but the variety and the fact that it's a purely skill game means that, two people of different skill levels can't really enjoy themselves the same way. So adding that randomness in is always kind of fun, adds a kind of cool layer to it. And dice are definitely better than decks. Definitely. So
I have my time.
The first thing I want to say is that dice just have a really nice feel to them. They're a really good component to have in a game. You throw a few dice, it's really satisfying. You have Monopoly, throw a couple of dice, it wouldn't feel the same with like decks. It's just very satisfying. Then dice can also reduce the box sizes. So you can have like travel editions, because a deck of cards, you can have quite a lot of cards that can all be kind of generally replaced with a set of dice. And then also when you're dealing with like decks of cards, stuff like Pandemic, where there's you have to set up the decks a certain way and it can kind of get confusing. You have a bunch of dice, everyone knows you just roll the dice and you get cracking. That's me.
Okay, so to counter this, we have Brian's opening statement.
God, if I knew those were going to be your opening points, I would have done half the preparation for this. It's going to be so easy. First of all, with chess, I'm going to throw it back a little bit. Let's add a bit of randomness to it. Hide little cocktail sticks behind your bishops. When your opponent goes to make a move you don't like, stab them. Boom. Randomness in chess. That's patent pending on that one, so just...
I'm not sure how that adds to the game.
How's that random?
Yeah. It just seems violent and pointless.
Do you ever play chess and expect to get stabbed in the hand with a toothpick? Random.
Oh, you're just stabbing the person.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay.
So, for decks, which I suppose I'm actually here to argue, decks are way cheaper. Way cheaper. First of all, like for prototyping, print off an A4 page, chop it up, stick it in card sleeves. Everyone gets what you're doing. When it comes to manufacture, and we can attest to this, Ciara especially will attest to this because me and you are constantly adding dice into games. If you throw custom dice into games, you skyrocket your price, which gets passed on to the consumer. So buying games, prototyping games, and making games all cost a whole lot more if you want to add dice into them. Whereas decks, cheap, cheerful, print, lovely. With dice, you're very limited. Like most dice, you just use 6-sided ones in games, so you're very limited with what you can and can't do in them. But you want to put in a deck of cards, there's like 300 different things you can do with one deck of cards, one really big deck of cards. You say reduce the size of the box. Actually, I find that interesting because I would have said dice games were bigger than deck games, because like you get a deck of cards as a small little cardboard box, you can have a whole game compressed into that. But dice, now you're gonna have to put in a big cardboard box. Where does that fit in your pocket? It doesn't. Crazy. I also think that decks, they keep the randomness because you don't know what cards are going to come up, you don't know when they're going to come up, but they allow you an element of strategy. Like if you have 5 or 6 cards in your hand, you can kind of start thinking about what you're going to do, what you want to do, what your next move is going to be. You can think 2 or 3 turns ahead, cards you want to save and stuff like that. Whereas with dice, you have to wait until you've actually rolled them, and then you have to see what they all are, and everyone's kind of leaning over the table looking, trying to decide what could happen, what will happen. Whereas when it comes to cards, you can go, boom, great turn. Boom, great turn. Boom, beat you. Dice is just roll. Oh yeah. First of all, the best. First of all, fourth of all, the very best thing about cards is that little noise you get when you shuffle them really well. I can't do it. One day I'll learn. But that little noise, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Also, Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm going to bring it up. I know we said we weren't going to, but I'm going to bring it up. Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't believe in the heart of the cold plastic dice. Yu-Gi-Oh! Believed in the heart of the cards. And I often find myself thinking, what would Yu-Gi-Oh! Do? You know, in times of trouble, what would Yu-Gi-Oh! Do? Probably throw some cards at someone and run away.
Save the world with card games.
Thanks for that opening statement, Brian. Some interesting viewpoints there from both of you.
I disagree with all of them.
I should have done that in my opening statement.
Owen, there are many games that have both dice and deck choices. Can you talk about some specific games that are your favourite and why you would pick the dice option?
There are a lot of games out there. Obviously, there's lots of games with dice in them that I love, and there's lots of games that have kind of like two versions of the game, which I quite like, where they've made a great game and they've added dice to it and they've just made the game better. It's just become a better game. So the two obvious examples are Roll for the Galaxy against Race for the Galaxy. Race for the Galaxy is a great game. Decks of cards give a lot of variety. But what they've managed to do is they've managed to keep that variety, but also the randomness becomes the dice. So they've kind of cordoned off the randomness into its own little section just for the dice, and they've kept the variety in the game. And that's kind of added a whole bunch of enjoyability to it. Enjoyability is a word, I'm pretty sure.
I think it is a word. I think you're all right on that one.
Not in Countdown, anyway. But Sushi Roll is a great game.
More than 9 letters?
I think it is, yeah. Sushi Roll is a great game as well, and it has the Sushi Go is the other one, and Sushi Go has card drafting, and it has all this kind of social kind of figuring out people and kind of tactics around it, and they've really done a great job at turning that into a dice rolling game, which is just really fun. Lots of cool components, good artwork. Everyone loves to roll a few dice, except for Brian. It's kind of added to the whole aspect of it.
I have to say, I'm a big fan of Roll for the Galaxy. I think having hundreds of dice makes it a lot more interesting.
But how much must that have cost them to make?
They're very tiny dice.
There's literally like 350 dice or something in that game, which I'll admit is really cool, just throwing out a handful of them. But, my God, the cost of it. I can only imagine.
It's a better game, though.
And do you think
it's worth the money?
Do you think that the fact that there are different types of dice in that game, there are multiple dice, but they also have different probabilities of getting faces on it, do you think that has an impact on the fact that it could replace cards?
I think it can get tricky when it comes to dice and deck comparing card games like that, because Roll for the Galaxy was an after Race for the Galaxy. So they learned a lot about Race for the Galaxy from people playing it, and then they came up with this version. And so people liked the aesthetic, so they made sure all of the dice kind of fit in with that team. And I know there's only one symbol on each side, and there's certain colors, but I think they make sure it's part of the game. And so they learned a lot, and they kind of used that knowledge to create Roll for the Galaxy in a very great way.
Cool. Brian, can you give us some examples of your favourite game with a dice and deck choice? And why would you pick the deck option?
So we're avid Pandemic players and fans. Like, we've played them all. Have we played On the Brink? I don't know. We'll come back to that one. But we've played all the legacy games. We've played the base game. But Pandemic the Cure is a dice version of Pandemic. And yes, I'll grant you, it is a bit fun. But the problem is, you take all the strategy out of it. Like, you're now just going, oh, there's the disease over there. I want to fight it. Roll the dice. No, can't do it this time. What about you? You give it a try. No, you didn't roll any numbers either. You? No. Oh, okay, well, the disease won. Like,
it happens in Pandemic as well.
Yeah, I know, but you can at least feel like you're trying in Pandemic. Like, at least if you're moving towards stopping outbreaks, you feel like you're getting there. But with the dice game, you could be perfectly positioned to stop the virus spreading, but you just haven't rolled any 2s. So you lose the game because of luck. It's not strategy. It's not, anything you've done. It's just lost the game because you rolled the wrong numbers.
Yeah, it can be tricky because sometimes people add in dice into games like this and it doesn't work out. So they try. It feels like for Pandemic the Cure, they tried to make a dice version of the game, but they kind of lost the concept of Pandemic because there's no map of the world. There's no moving around to visiting Madrid over here and then flying off to Khartoum, and so you kind of miss that team and that kind of style. But they did create like a much smaller kind of compact game with Pandemic the Cure. But it's I think they're different games. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. They are different games. It's not like a Pandemic and a Pandemic dice. It is a different version of the game. You're still basically just trying to cure viruses, but I just don't think it works as well because Pandemic in itself is inherently a very strategic game where you have to work together, you have to cooperate. But you can't cooperate and go, you didn't pull your weight, so you're not rolling any sixes.
I would say Pandemic Cure is easier to set up and easier to play, although it isn't probably not as satisfying maybe to finish it.
Yeah.
That's what they kind of set up to do with Pandemic the Cure. Yeah, they also added in dice for Pandemic Rome, which is instead of just taking a disease cube off, you roll a dice to see if you take a disease cube off. And a lot of people did not like that.
Yeah.
Because I think in that case...
you're putting in all the work and you still might not succeed.
Yeah, in that case, you have the deck randomness and the dice randomness. It's just too much randomness.
Yeah.
And there's that tipping scale, I think, when it comes to randomness, especially in games, where it's either you're playing a skillful game or you're just letting the game do whatever it wants.
Yeah.
And I think they just didn't get that right. I still love Pandemic Rome, though.
And do you think that with Pandemic, your problem is that the dice actually forces your actions, so you don't have action choice as much as you would in Pandemic? Is all about like what you're going to do with your 4 actions, and things like Pandemic the Cure and something like Star Wars. The rolling
Destiny, was it?
Destiny, yeah. You're forced to do whatever the dice says, and you don't have any. There's no choice. The dice takes away the choice. Is that your key problem with the Pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big issues of it. That you can't go, okay, well, look, it looks like there's going to be an outbreak over there. We'll move over there and try to handle that. You're just rolling your dice and going, oh, I suppose I'll take a little bit out of here, but it wasn't really a problem. But I don't have a choice. It's either that or don't use the dice at all. Like I think that's just like while it is still a fun game, I just think that's what lets it down very slightly by just adding complete randomness to quite a strategic game. For a less strategic game, you've got, I suppose, like Bang and Bang with Dice, Bang Dice. I actually don't know what it's called. I think it's just Bang with Dice. But like with Bang, where you're playing with a deck of cards, you've got a hand of cards. You can play cards out in front of you that protect you, that defend you. You've got a chance of saving yourself and beating others while you're at it. You can throw dynamite down and watch it pass itself around the board and maybe screw over someone else. Maybe it screws over an ally. But with the dice version of it, again, while objectively a fun game, it's completely random. So you could plan to, okay, I figured out who the guy is that I need to get. I know it's him. I have to get him. And you roll your dice and you just don't roll what you need to get. And now you've no choice but to wait till your next turn and hope you survive. Or worse still, you roll a load of arrows and you just get shot by the Indians. Or you roll a load of dynamite and it blows up in your face. There's no strategy to it. You need an element of strategy for randomness games. If it's just all chaos and random, it doesn't really work.
Yeah, it's called Bang the Card Game and Bang the Dice Game. Yeah, it's very close names. I get confused all the time with it. But I think I agree with you in the fact that sometimes when they create dice versions of games, they forget the concept of variety and skill, like you're saying. And with the Bang the Dice Game, they could have kept the skill and variety they had in the card game. Like, because when you look at Roll for the Galaxy, they didn't get rid of the cards or the planets or all this kind of cool stuff. They added in the dice and contained the randomness to the dice. And they just got rid of all the randomness of the cards. Now you still have the randomness of the cards when you're trying to pick your new planet to, you pick up a new one, it's still random, whatever you pick up. But they've kind of limited it a lot more. And I think that's the best way of creating dice alternative to games is you create one concept, whatever the main concept of randomness is in your game, change that to dice, but keep the variety of the cards, of the actions, of the skill, of the, predicting things. So yeah, Bang with Dice, they could have just tweaked it a little bit more so it wasn't just rolling dice and seeing what happens.
I do still think it's a fun game, but it just adds so much chaos to a game that is at least a little bit strategy previous to it with the decks.
Yeah, I think you can get the same problem with decks though, of just being at the mercy of decks of cards and that there's no skill involved.
Yeah, so on that question, Brian, do you think the size of the deck makes much of a difference in the randomness? So Terraforming Mars and Lords of Waterdeep have very big decks, and in those games there are a lot of questions around whether the card combinations that work together are going to come up. Do they happen to come up in such a big deck? And this makes the deck part of the game really unpredictable. So what do you think about games like that?
I think on the whole, it actually works quite well. If you have a huge deck of cards and the game you play only gets you through about a third of the deck, it allows for big replayability in the game. So, maybe when you play it this time, you get one assortment of creatures, monsters, spells, abilities, whatever it is. The next time you play, you get a whole different one. It's like playing a whole new game all over again. You're not just having the same repetition over and over and over and over again. Like, you've never played a dice game and gone, oh, we should play that again, and I hope I see the sixth side of the dice this time. You're always just, you know what's on the dice, and it comes down a little bit to luck, but big decks do add an element of randomness. And I think where Terraforming Mars lets down the decks a little bit is that a lot of the cards are dependent on when they come up, because you can have you can pick up 6 or 7 cards that can only be played earlier in the game and are now completely useless mid game or late game, and you find yourself stuck because you have nothing you can do, and you're just it's bad luck with the order the cards came up in. I don't know, could that have been split up into different decks, like for the first, until the temperature reaches this, play with these cards, or until the oxygen reaches this, play with these cards? I don't know. I generally think that the larger the deck makes for a more fun game, because it gives you that randomness to the whole game rather than just individual randomness. But as you said, it can work against you. It doesn't. It's not always your friend, especially if cards become useless, or like you said, you need combos and you just can't combo the cards.
Yeah, I think Terraforming Mars and Lords of Waterdeep are great examples of why random decks don't work.
Well, walk myself into that one.
I love those games. I like playing them, but the biggest downsides to them is the random deck, which is just you're talking a massive pile of cards, and you don't know what's going to come up next. And it's not, the variety is great. And I love games with that, with the fact that I haven't seen all the cards that are going to come up yet. Let's play again. And it really does add a new kind of layer to it. But when it comes to the dice, I think you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have the randomness be, you roll a bunch of dice and it says, oh, I want to pick it tells me I can pick a bio card, or like you roll, like I said, maybe you have all your cards in the deck into separate decks. You roll a bunch of dice and it tells you can pick 2 bio and then 1 manufacturing or whatever. And then you get to pick from those decks. And that gives you the variety of the cards, but the randomness is then contained within the dice. And the best thing about dice is that you can alter the probabilities of things that you can't do in decks. So if you wanted to say alter the probability of bio, you want more oxygen related cards in your deck, you have to create more oxygen cards and put it into your deck. Whereas with dice, you don't need to just flesh out your deck. You can have a really small contained variety of cool cards, and then your randomness is in your cards. And you say, I want bio to be really important. You pop it into your dice. And when it comes to manufacturing prototype, you say, you don't want that. You get rid of one side, put in a different one. And it's a great way.
I like that. Your argument is, if you want more randomness, you have to put in more cards. But you just go, I'll just change the side of a dice. Just change the whole face of a dice.
Yeah, that changes the probability of that. Of those
no,
things
so does adding more cards.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that the cards, you have to come up with new cards. And if you just, some people will just copy cards and you'll have duplicates of cards in a deck. And then that becomes stale after a while, But the advantage cards have there is that, say I want to increase the amount of utility cards I have by 2%, I can just add in 1 or 2 more cards. If you want to increase anything on the dice faces, you're doing it by 17% each time. True.
Boom, maths.
Yeah, but usually you're not that specific. Usually you don't care too much about the very minutiae of it.
How big is your deck getting that you're having 17% of something?
Yeah, I suppose if you're not playing with a deck that's at least 200 cards, what's the point?
So this is a question for both of you. In something as simple as Ticket to Ride, which is a card game that doesn't have a lot of, like, the cards are the main focus of the game. Do you think having players roll dice from a bag rather than drawing cards would make much of a difference? I know the cost of the game itself might change, but do you think when it's simple situations, like just picking a color, that it would have much impact on gameplay?
Yeah, it's tricky because in the Ticket to Ride game, that they have a deck of cards, and they've ensured that they have things like the wild train comes up a certain amount of time, and then you have the specific colors coming up at a specific time. And there is some strategy in Ticket to Ride of when to take cards, when to take from the deck versus when to take outside. If you know no one wants pink cards, you see a pink card, you're not going to jump at it because you know no one wants it. So, it's a kind of low value. You can see the value based on other players. If you translate that to dice, kind of like how Sushi Roll works, you end up almost playing single player solitaire, and you don't have to worry about this kind of mechanism of other people's cards and gaining. So it has pros and cons, and it really depends on what you want. So in Ticket to Ride, it's tricky when people, like you have two people. So if it's just three playing, me and Brian want blue cards and you don't mind, you've probably got a better chance of winning because me and Brian are constantly going to be attacking each other over blue cards. Whereas if it was dice, you don't have that problem. Now, whether that's a design choice as to whether you want that or not.
Yeah, you see, I feel though where dice would let you down in a game like Ticket to Ride is that, you pick up cards and you either someone's remembering 40 cards in your hand or they're just a straight up genius. You have an element of surprise. People don't know what you have in your hand, especially if you're taking cards from face down off the deck. Whereas with dice, you have to have the dice out in front of you. So people can go, well, there's clearly 4 black dice there, so they're obviously going for at least the 4 or 5 black route over there. So I'm just going to build something beyond that blocks them getting through. It takes away the kind of secrecy and strategy to the game. So the dice there tilted to too random rather than. And I know games like Roll for the Galaxy, you hide your dice, but I mean, you're playing an honesty game there where someone isn't just going to knock their dice over and go, oh, that's a better face. That's what it actually was.
People who play Ticket to Ride are very competitive and they cheat a lot.
Yeah.
Of all the games, for cheating, it's the least likely.
I would agree that there's the hidden dice thing is you can cheat easier in hidden dice. However, having seen people play poker and stuff like that, cheating with that decks does happen, and they're a lot better than I'll ever be at cheating with dice.
Well, there you go. It's easier to hide cards up your sleeve than it is dice.
That's true.
Another point for decks.
You're playing Sushi Roll and a Roll for the Galaxy comes out of your sleeve.
I'd like to export, please.
But you can keep the variety and stuff in Ticket to Ride. So you could one solution to that is you roll out in the open. And you gain, say, 2 blue and a pink. You get the trains, the 2 blue and pink trains, and you put that behind your thing, and everyone saw that. Then you can't cheat, and then people don't really know what your totals are. So, did you keep 5 blues? I haven't really been counting your blues. Do you have enough blues to block me?
So all you're doing is adding random to which cards you're taking.
Yeah.
But that's adding an unnecessary extra element on top of.
No, you're removing the deck randomness and you're putting in a much better, because the dice are better, randomness.
Yeah, but what happens if the 3 of us are playing Ticket to Ride? We all roll 5 dice and they all come up as blue just by sheer statistical coincidence. There's only 10 blue cards there. Who gets them? Why do you... there's no strategy to it. There's no blue routes left on the board, but you're stuck picking up things you don't want because luck has dictated it. You're not going, I'm taking those cards to block other people. You're going, I'm taking those cards because I'm stuck and I now have to waste a turn doing nothing with them.
Yeah, and in that case, because you have the variety in Ticket to Ride of choosing your cards or picking 2 random dice, you could have a thing where you can either roll 2 dice or pick a card. Pick one you want or roll 2. Like kind of how Ticket to Ride works, where you can pick the one you want, or you pick. I can't remember what are the rules of Ticket to Ride.
You can pick up 2 that you want, or 1 random card, or 1 like any card.
Yeah, but you can also pick from the deck, right?
You can pick 2 from the deck,
or you can pick 2 from that thing.
Yeah.
So then you would have like a global dice. You'd have you can roll a bunch of dice that are for everybody, and you can either pick from that, or you can roll your own dice.
Or re-rolling, like in King of Tokyo.
What's the difference between rolling global dice and having 5 dice out there with colours that you choose from versus 5 cards of colours face up in front of you, like Ticket to Ride currently has?
Yeah, Ticket to Ride suffers from all the cards being pink at some point.
Yeah,
it
and
does.
then everyone draws off the deck.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have that reroll possibilities. You also have this, like you're saying, that you constantly pick blue all the time in dice. That doesn't happen though in reality. In reality, it uniformly probability just means everyone gets everything at some point.
No, hold on. If we're going down the probabilities and statistics, there's a goat behind that door outside, and I say it's a car. Can't remember the name of that. Some game show probability.
Yeah, if you change your guess, then it becomes a.
It makes me think of Casino Royale, but I know that's not what it's called.
I'm making a very clever point, and I've dumbed it down by not remembering the name of it. Damn it. Anyway, but yes, now I defy you to argue against this one. Ticket to Ride. How satisfying is it when you're just picking up cards for like 6 or 7 turns in a row, and everyone's like, "Oh, he's clearly not getting what he wants," and then boom. You just have 5 turns of building massive trains, and you go from last place to first place, and it's just so satisfying to see the look on everyone's faces.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with the deck or dice.
Yeah.
But you can't hoard with dice. You've already argued that you can't hoard with dice.
No, but you roll the dice and you get the resources. So you're right in the fact that the decks cards you pick up are the resources. So it's 2. They have the ability to be 2 different things. That's the great thing about decks.
Thanks.
Cards, I know, is that they can be multiple things. All right, they can be the randomness, and they can have the functionality and the actions, and also be resources. They're really multi-use, and multi-use cards are awesome. But also the fact is that there's duplicates. There's massive amounts of duplicates of cards. So there's a whole bunch of pink cards, and whereas that could just be one side of a dice. So
Yes, but that one side of the dice is just as likely to come up each time.
Yeah, but you can change the probability with the dice. So you can determine.
If you take the pink off the dice, then no one gets pink.
And wouldn't that be better for everyone? So you can kind of change the probability, and but once you roll the dice, then you have to replace all of the versatility of that card with resources or with other things. So you end up with more components in a Ticket to Ride one, but the components are better. So you end up with a little pink train, or you can have a little pink token, and then the dice. Instead of just an ugly deck of cards.
So if you're prepared to spend double the amount of money on a game, dice are for you.
I will say card artwork is beautiful, but I don't know. Sometimes when I'm playing a board game, I want the artwork to be really nice, but I just don't want it just to be artwork on cards. Sometimes I want a big handful of dice or some cool tokens to hold in my hand.
Feel involved.
Tactile feedback. Yeah. So what are both of your opinions on Sushi Go and Sushi Roll? So Owen had brought up that he enjoys Sushi Roll a bit more. That's quite a bigger box than Sushi Go, and I think that we probably pay Sushi Go more overall, I think. So what do you think of the benefits of each of those?
Well, I think you've nicely made a lot of points in my favour there, so thank you, moderator.
I think Sushi Go, I like Sushi Roll. I think it's a really good
no backpedaling, moderator. No.
That's why they're 2 very, very good games. They're strong in their own they both have really good points.
I agree with you. Sushi Roll is good fun. I think but I think the card one works better because the card drafting, as you're passing the cards around, you can kind of see what cards are left over. So you kind of get a feel for what everyone is collecting, what everyone is hoarding, what's available, what's not available. And it allows you the opportunity to switch up kind of midstream, that you can go, oh, look, no one's collected any wasabi. I'm just going to grab a couple of them and they'll work in my favor. Whereas when you're playing with the dice, like, everything's out in front of you. Everyone's looking at the same dice. Everyone's making the same strategy at the same time. Everyone's going, I'm going to grab the wasabi first, and then I'm going to grab some sushi. I forgot the name for all the things.
Nigiri.
Nigiri, thank you. I was thinking Negroni, but I was like, no, that's a drink. But yeah, so when you have the hidden decks again, it gives you the opportunity to kind of strategize separately. And if you can even vaguely card count, you can kind of plan differently. You can adjust your plan midstream, but you can see straight away what everyone's doing when all the dice are face up in front of you. And obviously you can't hide the dice because people could just change them.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You're wrong though, but on a fundamental point. But I get the
build up. I like it.
Yeah, I know. I bring you in with the agreement and then I destroy you. But yeah, Sushi Go is fantastic. It has cards allow you to card count, which is really fun. So in Ticket to Ride doesn't really come up because you don't get through the deck really enough to be able to pay attention. Sushi Go, you have to get through the entire deck. So you have that ability to card count. So, like obviously you have to play the game a couple of times before you know what the kind of areas are, and you never pick the little cake thing because the cake thing is always bad money.
Unless you get all the cake things.
Yeah, you can be very lucky with the cake
Has
things.
to be all or nothing. That's
Yeah, but even one person goes all, the other guy gets one cake.
Yeah.
He gets half the points.
Yeah.
It's just not a good economy. Anyway, we can talk about that. But which is great. But the thing is, it gets a little bit predictable when you play Sushi Go for like the 10th time, and you know what your tactics are going to be because you card counted so many times. You know, in the first round you're going to get that. You're not really looking at the cards. You look at your own cards and you go, well, I kind of know what other people have, so I know what I'm going to do. Sushi Roll has the same card counting ability. However, it's not done over the entire game. It's done per round. Everyone rolls their dice, everyone card counts what's currently out, and then they have to figure out in their head what the best opportunity is. So you get the same card counting fun, but you're dice counting. And counting dice is more fun.
counting cubes versus counting flat rectangles.
Because you can keep playing Sushi Roll over and over again, and they'll always be different. They'll always be, well, most of the time they'll be different. Because you could roll the same thing twice.
I do think though with kind of card drafting games, it forces you to switch up your strategy. It forces you to be adaptable, to adjust. Like if you pick up a Sushi Go and you go, all right, this time I'm going to go for cakes. I'm just going to go for cakes. I'm going to try and get all the points for cakes. And the first 2 or 3 hands you get don't have cakes. You now have to switch up your strategy. You now have to go, okay, well, I need to pick something better. I need to change it up. I need to do something different. Whereas with dice, because it's random each time, people tend to go, I've got a strategy. I'm just going to keep rolling dice until I get it. And then it either doesn't work in your favor at all, or it works ludicrously in your favor. But it's all down to luck. There's very little strategy to it. Yeah,
but couldn't you say that the cake strategy, if you don't think the cake strategy is going to work in the cards, then odds are it's probably never going to work because you're never going to have enough cakes, or the cake strategy at the end doesn't work. Like you're talking about wasabi and nigiri, that's a pretty strong strategy. But if you play Sushi Roll and then wasabi is kind of low or nigiri is kind of low, that strategy starts to not work. This guy over here is taking all the cakes. His strategy is starting to work because of the roll of the dice have changed the probability of all these cards.
Yeah, but because you can see it as well, you can see he's now thrown 3 cakes in front of me. Like, well, there's no point catching him. I'm not going to get him on cakes.
Can I make a comment here? I believe for our listeners, cakes are pudding.
Oh yeah,
pudding.
Yeah,
pudding.
That's true.
Just in case anyone is wondering what the hell we've been talking about for the last little while.
Pudding makes more sense with sushi. Maybe.
Yeah. For new players, Sushi Go is kind of fun because I love the artwork. I love the fact that it's more predictable. But the thing is, the replayability with dice is kind of fun. Like you don't get the big deck of cards, but in Sushi Go, the variety of cards, there's not that many. And I think Sushi Go is a really good example of where if you don't have that much variety, it's not like Terraforming Mars where every card is different. Every card does something completely different. You can get a very strong alternative with dice.
I don't know.
Oh, okay. I think that was pretty much 50-50 on what was working better there. So, Owen, a common concern we had when we were making dice summoners was that the dice can be too random. And we did a few things to address this in the game and in the design phase, so that while there is a randomness that the dice bring to the game, it doesn't destroy the gameplay. Can you discuss some of the things that we did here to balance that?
Yeah. So I think that's a very common complaint when it comes to dice, is that they're too random. Is that you roll the dice and you're not really sure what you're going to get, and it's just kind of chaos. Whereas decks, it's much more kind of controlled and stuff like that. But I would just say that there are 2 different forms of randomness, and it's up to the game designers to kind of control that randomness and make sure that it works within the game's confines. Obviously in dice summoners, when we were thinking of the randomness and stuff, we have symbols on our dice, and it was the probabilities of those symbols allowed us to make sure that certain things are more valuable than other things, and it gave us this kind of way of the sides of the dice are resources that people can use inside the game. And it's kind of like having a deck of cards, where you have a deck of cards where it's like 30 cards or 40 cards, and you're picking from that deck. except for, there's not that many resources that we wanted to be random. So we wanted to have a kind of a very small set of random resources. And then we wanted to have the variety in the cards that are laid out on the table. Yeah. So we made sure that there isn't actually that much randomness in dice summoners when you roll the dice. But the more dice you get, it's still going to affect how you still have to deal with that problem, but it's not going to be like, like from 0 to 100, depending on what dice you have and how you've picked them, you're still going to get you can still kind of control what results you're going to get from those dice.
We developed the game together. I kind of saw it differently. I kind of saw that we, yes, there was an element of make sure no symbol on the dice is too overwhelming or anything like that, but that we used the decks of cards, the creatures that we had to offset the randomness of the dice. So even if you rolled and you didn't get any of the symbols you want, that you still had the deck there to fall back on, that, you could go, okay, well, that wasn't what I intended to do, but now look, thanks to the cards, I have a different strategy, something else I can do, something that works even better, perhaps. But it was the deck of cards in it that allowed you to, because I mean, if you're playing an exclusively dice game and you roll and you don't get what you want, great, thanks, my turn's over. Whereas with the deck of cards to balance it, you've got different options available to you. And I'll grant you that, with just a deck, it probably wouldn't have been as fun, but the good combination of balance of the dice in the deck. But I don't think you could have done it with just the dice.
I think how the dice and the decks interact in dice summoners is really what makes the game, where you have the ability to have a very high risk strategy where you're not really sure you're going to roll, and then make sure the cards kind of match that style. And you can also have ones which are much more reliable, and that can only be done with the deck, because the deck has a variety of the cards, all the different types of monsters with their different abilities, whereas the dice are very much the resources that kind of are given out. So yeah, we've taken in dice summoners, we've taken the resource management of like, how do you activate these creatures? How do you activate spells? And just made sure that the dice are responsible for that. And then the variety in the game of what you do and your actions and all sorts of things in your strategy is all done through the deck of cards. Yeah. So it's a good symphony.
Brian, there's one type of game that's highly dice orientated, which is the roll and write games. And those sort of types of games. Do you think that they could be done through decks?
I do. Yeah, thank you. Good question.
Okay, I'm not trying to believe you.
Stalls for time while he thinks okay. Yes. I do think you do. Take a game like Castles of Burgundy, where you're trying to build a little town in front of you. So you could have a game where, say, players play cards face down in front of them on what areas they want to take over or what they want to do in those areas. And you could play the randomness where, players playing against each other. If everyone goes for kind of high profile or high value areas that, you all cancel each other out. No one gets any rewards. Whereas maybe the strategy to going for some smaller areas. So you play a card, no one else is seeking that area. So now you can put out your tokens, you can write out on the board, you can take control of that area. You can color it in your color. You can gradually get more and more of the board. If people keep going for the high value ones, it doesn't necessarily work out for them. But that would be done with decks playing out. Whereas if you're just rolling dice, we've all played Castles of Burgundy where we just can't roll the right number to place out a castle or a town or a city or whatever little settlement developments we're trying to do. You've got your 3 little pigs sitting there that are worth a load of points to you, and you just cannot roll a 4, and it is driving you mental. Whereas if you have the strategy of it, you can go, okay, well, maybe I'll try and focus on other areas. Everyone seems to be focused on getting towards the center there, getting the high value ones that are worth the most points. But while they're distracted there and there's no competition, maybe I'll take a lot of the outside areas. That's an off the top of the head. Deck and draw? Deck and dice? What is it called? Dice and draw? Dice and rice?
Roll and write.
Roll and rice. My God.
You created a whole new roll and write.
I did, yeah.
We have some roll and write games. Okay.
Deck and draw. Painting it now.
I would say that when you're rolling dice in roll and write games, there isn't really a hand management aspect to it, which is kind of what you're talking about. And there is, you can always kind of mess around with the dice a little bit in roll and write games to make sure you get like a little bit different. There's always like resources and stuff you can modify your dice with, but it's never that. It usually only affects one round, and it's not something you can predict later on. which is a weakness of roll and write games. But I think that's the kind of point of those kind of games. So yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. It depends on what you're kind of building and what you want to do. But what you're kind of describing is a different kind of game. But you can definitely do it with dice with resources instead. So like what you're saying, if you can't roll a 4, you can maybe use the dice to generate a multicolored train.
But where you have to use
it's for different games though. Why is there a train in this castle?
Where you have to use like additional features of the game to offset the randomness of the dice, like the little workers in Castles of Burgundy, where you can't roll a 4. So now you have to spend a turn investing in getting the little workers so that you can adjust the 6 you roll next time down to a 4, just so you can place out 3 pigs. You're now spending 3 turns trying to do what you could achieve in 1 potentially.
I think that roll and write games don't usually have that adjustment feature, just for the.
Oh, okay. I've only played 1 or 2 of them, so
yeah, I think usually it's about adapting to whatever the dice rolls and being very flexible with your design of your gameplay. It's all about adapting to what happens in that round and having to guess the probability of the dice in the future.
In summary, decks are better.
I'm not sure that either dice or decks won that one. Owen, so dice have a limited number of sides, and really the limitation is that they're designed for games with a lot of repetition. Do you think that hinders what sort of games dice can be involved in?
Well, decks have a limited amount of cards.
with that attitude, they do.
There is a limit to dice, but I've never seen it come close to that limit in any of the games I've seen dice in. So yeah, I think the problem people have is they try and make dice into multi-use things where the dice can be used for future goes. And I think that's a big problem. But if you focus on just the randomness in a game and you try and so what I like to think is what would happen if your game was very like chess. It was very scripted and there was no randomness. So take Roll for the Galaxy. If you got rid of Roll for the Galaxy and you just made sure that each person could just do 6 things, what would that game look like? And then put in your randomness as your dice. Then you can easily maintain your game. Now the problem obviously with that is cards are just very handy to put a load of information on. You can just put in make them multi-use. You can have them, but games like Ticket to Ride and stuff like that, they don't use that. A pink train is the same as any other pink train, and there's very little on it.
We're really having a go at the pink trains here. It's
yeah.
Happens to be the colour that I picked it as well. I think that mostly pink is the least route that we take, whatever way the pink trains are.
Maybe that's what it is.
Damn you, toxic masculinity.
I think I don't. There probably is a Ticket to Ride with dice, which I'm sure we should play at some point. That would be pretty cool.
That'd be pretty cool. I don't know that there is.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
That's something to Google afterwards.
Yeah, but I think the dice are limited, but also I think decks are limited as well. And I think decks have this issue of people liking the fact that you can have loads and loads of them, but people get caught up in it too much that it kind of ruins the game. I don't know. I think I don't like the idea of just a massive deck of cards for ones like there's games like Seven Wonders where there is a whole bunch of cards and they're all like about, creating these Roman civilizations, and it's like all these wonders of the world, and they're really nice and some of the cards are really good, but then you have a whole bunch of them like that are just like a chicken farm and a blacksmith's house and stuff like that, and it's like, I don't need that. And I think you want to get rid of the boring aspects of deck randomness and you want to replace it with dice randomness, because dice are just you get the components, you roll the dice, it's quick, it's easy, you don't have to set up anything, and it's kind of like getting it out of the way. Like Roll for the Galaxy, the reason it's so good is because you don't have this hand management, you don't have these cards, you're not trying to read these cards all the time. You just pick up a bunch of dice, you throw them at someone, and you see what rolls.
Sure, Roll for the Galaxy is very aggressive. I don't recommend it. I don't know. I think decks offer you the option. I mean, it's what you're saying you don't like about the game. So, but the variety that you can build up to it. If you want to have 12 different ways to get to a wonder in Seven Wonders, the options are there. You can build your chicken farms, and maybe 50 chicken farms equals a wonder. The giant chicken farm of Babylon.
There's too many chickens.
No, there's just one chicken, the giant chicken farm of Babylon. But with dice, and maybe there are games out there with, custom dice on 8-sided, 12-sided dice, but the more sides you put on it, the smaller the images get and the harder it is to do custom stuff with it. You end up defaulting back to numbers that everyone can follow without having to flick back to a rule book to find out what the symbol means. But even with 6-sided, you're very limited. Then even if you're rolling 5 or 6 of them, you still have to get combinations. You still have to work out what you can possibly do. And again, just too much comes down to luck. At least, if you're building towards chicken farms, you can focus on chicken farms and you can hoard the resources to get them. Whereas if you're not rolling well, you're not rolling well. You're losing the game, and even a couple of good rolls might not get you back into it. But a good long-term strategy might have you losing throughout the game, but pay dividends in the last couple of rounds.
I'll tell you a great example of why dice are better than decks. And it comes to combat. So there's loads of games out there where there's combat where one person's attacking another person. So the obvious example is Risk, where you roll dice to attack each other. And then there are games with there's Gloomhaven, where it's scripted and then you have a deck of cards. So that's like dice versus deck. And then you have games like Blood Rage, which are in the middle somewhere, where you roll a dice and then you also can modify that with cards. And I think that it depends on what you want out of your game, of which one is better. But if obviously, I think Blood Rage is really good. And I think if you got rid of the dice element out of that, the random element out of it, it's too scripted. It's too much like chess. Yes, you might get into this issue of the dice never being on your side, but it's better than not having a chance because your other player is just better at the game than you. So, or they already picked up better cards, because Blood Rage has both, has the randomness of the dice and the deck. And I think that's what makes Risk really interesting as well, is that you got 6 people, the other guy's got 2. You're going to try and take Australia. You're going to win the game, and the guy with 2 just wins just because the dice are just on his side, and you've just wasted everything, and then you can't hold Russia. It adds these kind of aspects that the decks, like in Gloomhaven, you wouldn't get. It's a little bit more predictable. It's a little bit more card counting, and you don't get that just 2 guys in Australia just holding down.
I will grant you this. Dice are a great leveler that, you could have played the game 100 times and you come up against someone playing their very first game and they're just crushing you because they keep rolling better. So it lets them get involved. It lets them feel involved. And they're like, oh man, I totally crushed you. I thought you were good at this.
And then you cry.
Yeah. That's the flip side of it, is that you think, yeah, I'm finally getting good at this game. I've got my strategy down. And then you're crying because you're just rolling badly.
Yeah. That's what there's that balance. I don't think Risk is balanced. It's way too chaotic, but it's fun. It's really fun. You can play it once every now and then and have a great time doing it, but it's not a strategy game. Whereas Blood Rage, I think, has that strategy. You can keep coming back to it over and over and over again because the dice are balanced because of the modifications to the cards. And you need that. You need that when it comes to balance, when it comes to dice and decks, balance is key. Yeah. Mm.
Okay, one final question on all of this. So I'm going to expect a very quick answer from both of you. A sentence, hopefully. Perudo and poker are kind of the same idea, games or same concepts, but one is dice and one is card. But the dynamics leads to quite a different gameplay. I think these are gameplays or games a lot of people would have played. So what do you think makes them completely different? Or what do you think dice and cards add to the difference?
For anyone who hasn't come across Perudo, it's that dice cup game from Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah, completely forgot the movie. I was going to say Lord of the Rings. No, Pirates of the Caribbean. I think in this case, with the dice, it's just anarchy. It's just chaos, because you can't, if everyone flips their cups and you're playing with 6 people, there's 30 dice on the table. 30 dice could be a 6, and then it's just madness. You're looking at your 5, 6 going, well, everyone can't have 6s. And while it adds that fun, crazy element, it's completely unpredictable. It takes all the strategy out of it. You're entirely guessing.
I haven't heard a single con. Yeah.
Well, they were cons, but okay. But with poker, you can go, okay, well, I have these cards. Those are the cards everyone else is using. Say, let's just say Hold'em. You've got the cards in the middle. You know what people might be playing to. You can work out what people might be going for and how people are playing based on what cards come up and when they bid. And there's strategy and there's bluff and there's tactics to it. Whereas with Perudo, it's just 37s.
Yeah, but it depends on where you get the enjoyment out of poker, right? because I think the most enjoyment you can get out of poker is bluffing, or reading people, and then seeing what people are good at. So, but the only problem I have with poker is that I can have like a 7 and a king, and then I can see the flop of cards in Texas Hold'em, and I can calculate to an exact percentage of my chance of winning her without looking at anybody else's face or cards. Whereas in Prudo, I get a whole bunch of numbers, and it doesn't really matter. You know, until someone starts bidding, this could be anything. You know, it's like a black box. Everyone has a Schrodinger cat. Who knows what's underneath their Prudo cup?
But there's no such thing as a good hand in Perudo. Like, you can have 3 6s and 2 5s, and you're like, okay, great. Well, if anyone goes for either of those numbers, and then some lunatic down the end of the table comes in with 10 2s, and where do you go from there?
Yeah, but I think that's that bluffing, right? It's not like you in poker you can have 2 aces, and then it gets really fun because you can bluff. All right, but when you don't have a good hand, you can't really bluff. It doesn't matter. You have to kind of back out at some point because you have no chance of winning. Like, bluffing is just much more difficult, I find, in poker when everything is so predictable. There's a percentage chance of winning. Whereas in Prudo, there's no percentage chance of winning because you just don't, there's no like possibility.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments there.
I can keep talking about this for ages.
I could keep going now.
So, okay, Brian, do you have any closing comments you want to make?
Yes. Thank you for awarding me the victory on this debate. It has been very pleasant to be here. Sorry, dice are good fun. I can't argue with that base point that they are brilliant. It's great to just throw a handful of dice out on the table.
You have been arguing with me.
I can't argue with that point. I'm going to argue with a lot more. But they are just too random. There's no strategy to it. There's no balancing to it without adding in a deck of cards. It's just chaos and anarchy. You can tailor dice, you can add in different shades and colors and different faces, but you're always just relying on the look of the roll. Whereas with decks, you can at least strategize, you can plan, you still have the randomness of the deck of cards, but there's at least a bit of planning, thinking, doing, working to it. You can combo and stuff like that, but you know, with dice, it's just too random. The end.
Okay. And Owen, any last words?
So I wouldn't say that they're too random. I think the points I've been making is that you can tailor the randomness of dice. So when you're thinking about randomness, I believe when you want randomness in your game, you want to make it short and sweet. You want to make it really tactile. You want dice.
Oh, that was punchy, damn it.
And it has a really kind of satisfying feel to them. And you need it in combination with other parts. Now, I will say that the decks are really fun to look at, artwork and the components. And like, you know, you get a good linen card. It's very satisfying. But when it comes to throwing some bones, which I think is what people say, that's very satisfying. You can get a whole, and dice come in all sorts of shapes and sizes.
Not necessarily made out of bone.
Yeah, you don't have a deck of cards in D&D. You want to roll a dice. I think in some cases it's a natural fit, and in other cases you should just squeeze it in there.
Just shoehorn dice in wherever you can.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so that pretty much wraps it up for dice versus deck randomness. Did your opinion change? And who do you think won the debate? Comment on our social media to let us know. If you enjoyed it, share it. We've been Decking Awesome Games. Thanks for listening, and bye.
See ya.